What up? What up, fam? It's Matt here with my buddy,
Hey everybody, I'm Kegan.
and I think we're just gonna chop it up. Uh, do you want to talk a little bit about your background, or should I introduce you?
Um, no, I can get right into it.
Okay, so we met at an event called the 4x4x48, which was an event to support veterans' mental health, and particularly healing with psychedelic therapy. And it was just a really beautiful moment in time. I got to meet this beautiful person who
You're beautiful, brother.
thanks man, who at the time you were still going through rehab and you hadn't gone on a ayahuasca retreat or any retreat yet. Like, that was
Right.
pre-retreat.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's talk about like how that all came together for you. How did you get involved with Heroic Hearts? And yeah,
Yeah.
let you do it.
My background is I was a US Navy F-18 pilot, and in 2014, I ejected at 695 miles per hour. Um, if you want me to tell the story on that, I can get into
Yeah, it's
kind
a
of what
crazy
happened.
story.
Um, so I was stationed with VFA 143, the Pukin Dogs, out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. It was January 2014, and I had been in my squadron for a little under a year. At that point, I'd already gone through 3 years of flight training. I was a winged aviator. I was in the fleet preparing for deployment. So while I wasn't a highly experienced F-18 pilot, I at least wasn't the new guy anymore in my squadron. And that morning I showed up to the squadron, pretty regular day in that world. My buddy Fisty is his call sign. He was standing duty, and for fun, he put up on a whiteboard behind him, he put up all these GPS tagged sharks that are out in the working area. This whiteboard basically displays the airspace that we're going to utilize for our flights that day that's out over the Atlantic Ocean. And he put up, just as a joke, he used the Shark Tracker app, and he put up all these locations of the GPS tag sharks that were out there. And there just so happened to be a 16-foot, 3,500-pound white shark named Mary Lee directly underneath the area I was going to go use to fly over that day. So, just joking, he's like, hey, man, it's going to be a terrible day to eject. There's a great white shark right underneath you. So, you know, laughed about that, not thinking much of it. The buoy temperature out where I was going to be operating that day, the water temperature was at 37 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air temperature was below freezing. So really cold temperature, cold day. Put on my dry suit underneath all my flight gear, went out. Most of the flight went pretty uneventfully. We did air-to-air refueling, and then broke off and did air combat maneuvering, or BFM, basic fighter maneuvering, which is probably what most people think of when they think fighter pilot is a couple jets trying to shoot each other down. And in this case, for training purposes. But we went out, we did several sets of that. My flight lead in his jet, me and mine, and we got to where we hit Joker fuel, which means we were almost out of gas. But we had just enough time to set up for one more round of this fighting. And we called Speed and Angels, and 3, 2, 1, fights on. We pitched into the merge, which is basically, we started out abeam each other, and we pitched in and dove in at each other. And as we crossed paths, I opted to continue my pull towards the ocean in a downward dive called the split S maneuver. So I rolled the jet inverted and pulled. And as I came through, basically bullseye nose low of that turn, so pointed straight at the ocean, a system on the jet that thought there were bombs on the wings when there were not any overrode my control input. So it'd be like going around a sharp corner in a sports car and then having the steering wheel kick back halfway. Only instead of skidding off the road, in this case, I'm stuck in a dive at the ocean. There were things that I could have done to potentially avoid that. I was maneuvering the jet really aggressively at a high airspeed, and but anyways, the system kind of exacerbated what had happened at that point. So I was then stuck in a dive at the ocean. This all just happens in a few seconds. The way I felt it was I'm pulling 7.5 G's in this turn. The stick is in my lap. So it's almost 8 G's. If say my head and helmet with the Jehemix helmet, which is this big bulky helmet that we wear that gives us all these abilities to look around and have our weapon systems trained with the helmet. For rough math, say my head and that helmet weigh about 20 pounds. Well, at almost 8 G's, that's like having almost 160-pound person on my head. So I can feel that force as I'm looking outside. I can feel my body being compressed down. I'm at this point weighing almost 2,000 pounds of what it feels like I weigh. And all of a sudden that jet, as the system kicked in, it eased up to about 4.5 G's. So I could feel all that force lift off of me. So my reaction was I pulled the throttle to idle. I put out the speed brake to try to slow down, but it was too little too late. So I was stuck in a dive at the ocean, and at 51 degrees nose low, so a very steep dive, at about 2,000 feet above the ocean, which is very close, I was 2 seconds from impacting the ocean. The ocean is just rushing up at me. There was no doubt it was time to get out of there. And when I pulled the ejection handle, I was at 695 miles per hour. And in less than half a second, my body shot out into that explosive air force. If you've ever stuck your arm out a car window going 70 miles per hour down the highway, you felt about 1/100th of the force that impacted my body simultaneously at almost 700 miles per hour. And the force of that air at that speed is stronger than many explosions. It ripped my helmet off, smashed my face up, gave me a brain injury. I broke my neck, my left scapula, my shoulder. I broke both my upper arms. My right humerus tore through my brachial artery in my right arm. Both my lower legs were flailing around with steel-toed boots on them that essentially became like maces, and they smashed open my tib fib on both legs. So I had 2 open leg fractures. The bones in my lower legs were destroyed. I had ejected so fast that the gear on my survival vest ripped off. The dry suit I was wearing to protect me from that frigid, cold ocean water ripped open. And so the parachute opened I had about 1.5 seconds left from impacting the ocean. And in that time, it was able to decelerate me enough that I didn't die when I hit the water. And then that parachute that had just saved my life quickly sunk underneath the open ocean currents and started to pull me under. And anybody who's been in, doing a cold plunge in 37-degree Fahrenheit water, how that stings you and how it feels like needles going into your skin. And when your head goes under, it gives you brain freeze. So I've got this piercing cold filling my dry suit, which is weighing me down even more. My arms and legs are so destroyed, I have no ability to swim. And then the parachute just sunk under and started to drag me under. There was a malfunction in the disconnection. It's called the seawars that connects the parachute to the harness. The military has a lot of antiquated gear, and these seawars are no exception to that. That one fired but didn't disconnect, and the other one didn't fire whatsoever. So I was trapped to that parachute, and for the next hour and a half, I basically just got drowned alive by the parachute. If you've ever been held under by a big wave surfing, you need a breath of air and you can't get it. Well, that's where I was at for that 90 minutes. I inhaled a lot of salt water. I don't know how I survived. I should be dead just from that drowning. And then I was getting extremely hypothermic. And meanwhile, in the back of my head, I'm thinking there's this massive freaking jaws that's going to come up and eat me at any second. Fortunately, Mary Lee did not come and eat me. Obviously, I'm here talking to you. After an hour and a half, my flight lead was able to coordinate a rescue effort and get other helicopters on scene. And eventually a Navy H-60 Seahawk helicopter got me out and headed back to the Norfolk General Hospital, which was fortunately within range of the helicopter. By the time they got me there, I was in and out of consciousness. I had essentially coded, died in the helicopter, and they had resuscitated me multiple times. And they rushed me into the level 1 trauma center once they landed. And once I got in there, they started treating me for initially severe hypothermia. my core body temperature was at 87 degrees Fahrenheit. I should have been dead from the hypothermia, but a wild twist of fate, the hypothermia actually saved me from bleeding to death. And they treated me for hypothermia. I had to have blood transfusions. My kidneys were failing from the overload of just destroyed tissue in my body. But once they got me semi-stable, they rushed me into surgery and induced a coma. And for the next week, I underwent over a dozen trauma surgeries. They did everything from fasciotomies for compartment syndrome. Basically, my arms and legs were so battered and destroyed, were swelling up. And, you know, back not that many decades ago, if you had compartment syndrome, they would just amputate a limb. But with a fasciotomy, that means they open up all the fascia tissue that surrounds your muscle, and it relieves pressure so that you can get blood circulation back to your extremities. And so you can probably see a little bit on there, but I've got these big scars from fasciotomies on all four extremities. And they opened me up. They repaired me with the fasciotomies initially. They had to do brachial artery bypass in my right arm. And then once I was semi-stable, they rebuilt my skeleton with titanium rods in my arms and legs, a steel plate in my left forearm. And so now my x-ray basically looks like Wolverine. So that's cool, at least.
Can you do the hand thing too?
They didn't install that. Freaking government guys.
They gave you the upgrade.
Maybe someday they'll give that one to me. No,
you fucking earned it.
Yeah. So I was in rough shape, you know, and after another week of being in a non-induced coma with them wondering if I was going to pull through, I eventually came to. And my first memories were, I had no recollection how I'd gotten there. I had no memory of what had happened. I didn't really even fully realize I was, you know, injured. I was asking my squadron mates and friends to just grab a wheelchair and get me out of the hospital. I didn't need to be there. I had to be at work and I had a busy schedule. They're like, listen, man, you're going to be here for a minute. I remember I thought the little wool blanket over me was made out of lead or was tied down because I could not move it, but it was because I was paralyzed. And then over the next 3 months, I rehabilitated through a whole lot of therapy of every kind that's conventional at a VA center up in Richmond called the VA Polytrauma Center. And, you know, every day was just trying to do what I could do, relearn. I had to relearn. I had vision therapy. I had speech therapy. I had occupational therapy, physical therapy, kinesio, recreational, aqua, you name it. All these conventional therapies that you can name. While that was great and the facilities were, you know, had a fresh coat of paint, there was also some massive shortcomings, and namely the food was just abysmal processed crap. So here they are spending all this money on all this therapy and all these pharmaceutical drugs that they're happy to give you, but they don't want to spend any money on giving you decent nutrition. You're not getting good sleep. They wake you up all night to give you medicine so you can sleep and take your vitals. So there were some massive shortcomings. I mean, from where the VA was back in the Vietnam War era, you know, those guys were shoved 12 dudes in a room covered in piss, shit, vomit, and blood. And we're lucky to see a nurse once a day. They'd been drafted into a war they didn't sign up to fight, injured, critically treated that way. And then once they were good and addicted on morphine, they'd be wheeled out in a wheelchair and left on the side of the street and say, good luck. Thank you for your service. So things have come a long way since then, but there's certainly some shortcomings that I saw. But that was just more motivation to get better for me in a way. Little by little, even though the doctors came in and said, you're never going to walk again, you're never going to use your arms again, your flying career is over. Over the next 2 years, more surgeries, going through prescription drug withdrawals against the advice of the pain management clinic. I weaned myself off of everything I was on. I mean, the list of stuff they had me on: amitriptyline, tramadol, trazodone, oxycodone, OxyContin, gabapentin or Neurontin. Initially, they had me on fentanyl, Dilaudid. So all this crap that they had given me, not to mention all the stuff they gave me to counter effect the side effects of all that stuff, that put me in a pretty bad spot. But I came through. A lot of help from friends got me back out surfing, back out mountain biking, back in the gym. And little by little, I started to put myself back together again with a lot of help from friends. And after 2 years of all that, I regained flight status. I got a bunch of medical waivers, and I went back to flying Super Hornets again. And it was like a dream come true. And that's kind of where sort of the Walt Disney version of my story would end, a happy ending. But unfortunately from there, things took a turn for the worse. I had been back flying Super Hornets for about 1.5 years. I thought I had fully made a full up recovery. I had all these medical waivers. I seemed to be doing great physically and mentally. And then some issues from, at this point I've identified were likely unresolved TBI, unresolved brain injury issues, were exacerbated on a flight where they think I might have gotten decompression sickness from a pressurization malfunction in the jet. Basically, if you're a scuba diver, you're familiar, if you come up from depth too quickly, the nitrogen in your blood can come out of solution and create these little bubbles. If you get that in your joints, they call it type 1 DCS or the bends. It's painful and uncomfortable. If you get type 2 DCS, that's when those little bubbles form in your brain. So to the best of what we can figure out, it seems that the cabin had fluctuated in pressure due to a malfunction in the environmental control system of the jet. That caused little bubbles to form in my brain, which exacerbated an already some unresolved brain issues that I had. And anyways, it put me in a state where I couldn't sleep. My insomnia was awful. I got really bad vertigo. I felt like the room was tumbling. I remember I went back to my hotel room to try to sleep it off from where we were on a detachment down in Florida. And I thought I would just sleep it off and I'd be all right. Maybe I just was tired. And I was trying to do the math to set the alarm on my phone, and I couldn't do the math for what time. I couldn't operate an iPhone alarm clock. I was so out of it. So later that night, I just knew something was really bad. My anxiety was spiked. So I contacted the safety officer in our squadron. I was taken to a nearby dive center. They put me in a hyperbaric chamber where I underwent about 3.5 hours of this decompression. And that helped a little bit. But when I got back to NAS Lemoore in California, where I was stationed at that time, the advice was, hey, you need to go see the flight surgeon, which was about the last thing I wanted to have to do after going through all that to fight to get back to my job. And I knew it was jeopardizing that again, but I knew something was seriously wrong with me and I didn't know what it was. Before long, they had me seeing a psychologist, and I ended up with a delayed onset PTSD diagnosis. And initially the version of treatment was, here, you've got a CBT app and a CPT app and a meditation app. We'll just put those on your phone and you can do those apps and it'll help you get better. And, that was just more exacerbating and infuriating to me that, this is the way they're going to handle whatever's going on with me. I don't know what it is, but to tell me I can just put an app on my phone, it's going to get me better, was absurd. So when that didn't work, of course, they ended up pushing more drugs on me. Hey, here's the solution. You have a PTSD diagnosis, and according to the medical community, here's the best way to deal with that, and that is these psychotropic medications. Before long, they ended up having me take a medication called Seroquel or quetiapine, which is a pretty heavy-duty antipsychotic medication that was being prescribed to me for insomnia at a low dose. And little by little, it knocked me out. It made me sleep a little bit, but in time, it just exacerbated everything. And my anxiety transformed into hypervigilance and paranoia, where I got to the point I thought I was in some version of the Truman Show starring myself, where everybody was watching me and listening to me, and everybody I interacted with were actors. It got to the point where I thought I was being hunted by the government. I thought there were, snipers out trying to kill me. I thought I was being poisoned in my food and my water. It turns out I was being poisoned by the government, but it was in the little pills that they were giving me that were FDA approved. And as I got worse and worse, my wife was having to take care of me. We had a little boy, a newborn baby boy. And here I am, my career is collapsing. I'm mentally collapsing. My wife is having to deal with somebody in a psychosis all the time. And the only help that I seem to be getting is, here, take these pills, it'll get you better. And that was just making it worse. I became suicidal. I went to some dark places, nearly put a pistol in my mouth, and ended up going through a medical board, processing out of the military after a 1.5 year fight through that process, which was another freaking nightmare that I could expand hours on. But eventually was medically retired, very fortunately, after having to appeal my case, despite having stacks of medical records and the medical community and my squadron on my side. It still became this massive fight with the medical system and the DOD and the VA to get me a medical retirement, despite such a clear, obvious case. Eventually, I was medically retired, moved back to Northern Michigan with my family. And the answer was still more freaking Seroquel. And at that point, I was at 300 milligrams a night. And I went in to see the psychiatrist, because that started to lose its effectiveness as my body got used to it. And I built a tolerance. And his advice was, of course, you need to take 450 milligrams a night. And within just a few nights of taking that dosage, which is a freaking heroic dose of quetiapine, by the way, my wife heard me rustling around one day. She came into the room to find me completely naked, other than a black plastic garbage bag I had tied around my neck like a cape. I had shaved off all my hair in chunks. There's still a few little chunks of hair and patches. I shaved off my eyebrows, what facial hair I had at the time. And I thought I was going to go out into the Northern Michigan snowy weather and fight crime like a superhero, because I thought I was freaking Batman or something. Well, she rushed me to the ER. I ended up having an out-of-body experience on the floor of the ER, traveling through time and space, and ended up coming back to my body and being transferred down to Battle Creek, Michigan, where I was put in a VA inpatient psych facility. So basically a mental institution for veterans. And there I saw the inside of a pretty dark system. You know, I was in and out of psychosis, but I also have a lot of lucid memories from that place. And what I saw from a lucid standpoint was this VA facility where, you know, what I really needed to heal was some decent sleep, some decent nutrition, some exercise. I needed to get outdoors. I needed to be around people that loved and cared for me. It was the opposite of that. I don't know if it's malicious intent or just complete incompetence that has led to these policies, but every 15 minutes, they had to wake me up with a flashlight in my face to make sure I was safe. Not to mention, these facilities are not an easy place to sleep in to begin with. There's a bunch of other people, other veterans going through serious mental health issues, pacing the hallways, yelling, screaming. Everything is echoing because everything is a hard tile floor with concrete walls. So everything echoes up and down the hallways. You're in rooms with other people that are having disturbed nightmares while they sleep. So at a baseline, it's hard to sleep already. On top of that, they're waking you up every 15 minutes. The food was just complete nutrition lacking, processed garbage. There was hardly a fresh fruit or vegetable in sight. Even when you did get a salad, it was just like white iceberg lettuce with a bunch of seed oil dressing on top. Is just garbage. We got to go outside maybe twice a week if we were lucky. And when we did go outside, it was in a concrete yard with big metal fences and concrete buildings surrounding it. So you couldn't really even see nature. The closest thing to nature we had were some wood chip mulch and like little shrubs that were in the little area they put us in. So it's pretty awful. I mean, if you take an elite military member at their peak physical fitness and you put them in a survival school situation for 2 weeks where you deprive them of sleep, nutrition, you confine them. Well, that's how you break an enemy combatant. And it make a healthy person go into people in those situations in survival schools go into visual and auditory hallucinations who are perfectly healthy. Now you take somebody who's in my state and you do all the same things to them, of course it's going to exacerbate the problem. And so guess what the answer was? What the primary treatment tool? Freaking more meds, more pills. And that's what gets pushed on you. And in my lucid moments in there, I remember sitting down with other veterans who, through their struggles, had been homeless, had been in and out of prison and jail. They all agreed. Every single one of them that I talked to said they would rather be in prison than in this VA's inpatient psych facility because the treatment of prisoners in prison is better, which is, freaking mind blowing. It's awful what's going on to both parties,
It sounds like prison.
But they're like the food is better in prison. You get to go outside more regularly. You have a schedule. You can work out in prison. Like, I'm not saying it's a good place to be either, but like freaking, it was mind blowing that that's what it was like. And so I started to plan an escape when I saw the way it was. I took things that I learned in SEER school and I put them to use for real. And I coordinated with other veterans in there that wanted to do the same thing. I started stockpiling clothes and food. And my plan was I was going to pull the fire alarm. And when they let us out for the fire, we could make a run for it. A lot of the guys in there, they were so out of it. They were such zombies on all the drugs they had them on. They would have just herded them back inside like sheep. But those of us that were capable would have made a run for it. Well, one night I tried it. I pulled the fire alarm. Apparently somebody had already tried that trick. And base police showed up. They ended up putting me in a room and the head nurse of the place came in, who I actually really respected. He really cared about us. And he had a syringe full of Haldol. And he said, "Hey, we can do this the easy way or the hard way." So I just bent over on the table and I said, "Stick it in my ass, Mike," just kind of joking with him. And he put this syringe in my butt and pumped me full of Haldol. Now, if you've ever seen a movie about mental institutions and you've seen somebody like freaking out and their tongue's coming out of their face and they're yelling and screaming and twitching, and that's probably because they just got stuck with Haldol. And it's supposed to be an antipsychotic that can calm you down from a psychosis state. But the effects of what that felt like were like having insects underneath all of my skin trying to gnaw their way out through my skin. All I wanted to do was rip my own skin off, run up and down the hallways screaming. Incredible restlessness. All I wanted to do was move, and that just didn't help. And the effects of it probably, I don't know how, I lost track of how long it lasted, but it was probably an hour of that, if I had to guess. And if that's not freaking torture, I don't know what is. And after that, they really had broken me. And once I was broken, I took whatever pills they wanted to give me. I didn't care anymore. I couldn't fight it. And so they had me drugged out of my mind and all these pills. I don't know what all they were giving me at that point. But I was basically drooling on myself, completely out of my mind. While I was in that state, they shuffled me into a room with this soulless lawyer. And this isn't something I hallucinated. This is real. They sat me down at this table and they had me signing documents that I'm literally drooling on myself. I don't even know how to write my name, but they had me scribbling on these pieces of paper. And what that did legally is it committed me. I had been voluntarily admitted to the hospital. I should have been able to leave at will whenever I wanted. They would not let me. And then once they pumped me full of Haldol and drugged me up, they had me sign these documents, which committed me legally, which meant now I couldn't just say I wanted to leave, which apparently I couldn't do anyways. And it also put me on the law enforcement information network as if I had committed a crime. And it also stripped me of my Second Amendment right to bear arms. I'm no longer legally allowed to purchase a firearm. So here I am, an American veteran, trying to get out of the worst point I've ever been in my life. And instead, I got drugged, confined, abused, tortured, and had my constitutional rights stripped from me that have had long-lasting legal repercussions. I didn't commit any crimes. I wasn't arrested. I didn't do anything other than show up and try to get help through the conventional system that's available to veterans. And this is what happened. Eventually, with the advocacy of my family, they got me out of that freaking hellhole. And I spent the next 6 months slowly coming out of these psychosis states that I would go in and out of. And of course, guess what the answer was more quetiapine and more of these other medications, these psychotropic medications. So at this point, I spent several years in that. It broke me. It destroyed my soul. I became just a shell of who I once was. When I did have emotions, it was anger, frustration. I could barely do the dishes. I could barely read. My son would come up to me and try to play with me and pull on my leg as I was trying to, do the dishes or whatever. And I would just push him away. And I was just a negative force in my family, on the verge of divorce, on the verge of losing my child. So I was in a really bad spot. And in what limited mental capacity I still had, I found the book, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And I struggled to read a paragraph and remember it at a time, but the combination of reading it and then listening to the audiobook over and over again, I was able to retain enough that I decided to give psychedelic medicine a try.
Is that what led you to HHP?
Yeah. So I initially contacted Vet Solutions. They're largely serving the operator community. I was not from that community. I reached out and I understand their situation is like Schindler's List. There's so many people that need this medicine and this healing, and they can only give it to so many folks. So I didn't initially get into their program, but they did send me an email about the Warrior Angel Foundation. We're doing this event down in Texas, the 4x4x48 challenge, from the minds of David Goggins, run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours straight. And I put together a little fundraiser page. I didn't have any social media at the time. I was very cut off from everybody, but I just put up a little short story about what had happened to me. And within just a little over a week, I think the page had raised almost $10,000. I had emailed it and texted it to a few friends and family that were close, thinking no one cares about me. At this point, I was so cut off and broken, and I just got immense support from just that one little bit. And Adam Marr gave me a call on the phone. He's like, "Hey man, do you want to come down to Texas for the event?" I was like, "I would love to." And that's where I met you. And that event was so transformative for me because, well, one, I just met this incredible community of individuals like yourself, of all these, former high operating military personnel from SEALs and Green Berets and MARSOC, and just incredible human beings from their world that they worked in, high functioning people that we didn't have the exact same story, but the theme was very similar. We had these injuries, whatever the cause them. We had these long-term repercussions of our brains not working right. And the answer, of course, was medication. And they just threw frickin' pharmaceutical drugs at us that made all of us worse. In every single case, it almost destroyed all of our lives, from suicide, drugs, alcohol, tearing our families apart. We all had this similar story. And from that, when I decided I wanted to try psychedelics as a healing modality, my family was even very concerned. Of course, my VA psychiatrist is like, couldn't even talk to me about it. And I had a lot of naysaying. I had so many people pushing back against this idea that I could, take these psychedelic medicines and potentially get better. But I kind of knew it was the right answer. Anyways, I found myself down in Texas, out on this ancient Comanche warrior land, as we completed these 2 days of just brutal physical punishment combined with some pretty incredible ceremony with the Native American group that came and joined us there. And I came out of that event and I felt I had a purpose in life again. At the closing of the staking ceremony at the end, the elder invited us to place our intentions with this old tree that was out in the middle of the field there. And I kind of thought about what my intentions would be going forward in life. And I kind of just had this mess of stuff in my head I didn't really know. But as people kind of cleared up, I walked up to that tree and I put my head against it. And the second my forehead touched the bark of this tree, I got this shot of energy. It felt like this white electrical bolt shot into me. And I not only immediately could sense that whatever that force was understood every intention and who I was. Mm-hmm. It also sent back to me this message that, you know, I was intended for this higher purpose. And all of that has happened to put me in this moment to help other people, to be of service, to find love in my heart and to heal others. And out of that, I met Jesse Gould of Heroic Hearts. I even got the t-shirt out of the moment.
Shout out Jesse.
Met to you. And I was welcomed into this community of people that were actually healing and finding modalities that really worked. And that's how I got in touch with Jesse. He graciously got me down to Peru, where I did a week of ayahuasca ceremonies. We did 3 sessions of ayahuasca. I got in touch with Resiliency Brain Health, where I did.
Before we get into that, what I want to ask you about, and I'd love for you to share, is the experience you had coming into that ayahuasca ceremony.
Yeah.
What that was like for you, and the insights, just so you talk about the insights of that tree, which I didn't know about. That's beautiful, brother. Is that experience with the medicine.
Yeah.
And what did it show you? What did you learn from that experience? And how did that help you on this path of healing? And we can get into the TBI side of stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, I did 3 nights of medicine. We had Shipibo guides, and the first night, you know, was to break it up, to kind of simplify. The first night was sort of like the pre-op for soul surgery. The second night of ceremony was like this very intense soul surgery. And then the third night was sort of this post-op where I was stitched, my soul was put back together again. On the first night of medicine, I had, similar to what I've experienced on probably fairly regular doses of psilocybin. You know, I had a lot of visual hallucinations. I had this massive snake swallow me whole, and it felt like the snake had put a venom in me, and I felt very nauseous the first night. And I felt myself in the pit of the stomach of this massive snake as it was digesting me, essentially. And somehow it became very pleasant. It was like it was caressing me as I was becoming part of the snake through its digestive process. And that night was, it was powerful in its own right, in that it kind of introduced me to the medicine. I largely stayed in body the first night and was present in the room, but still having these pretty intense hallucinations. And towards the end of the ceremony, one of the Shipibo guides walked up to me and he spit this perfume that splattered all over my body. And as the perfume impacted my body, it's pitch black in this room, but I saw these bright white and red spirals. Each spot that it hit my body, it was like these spirals came out of me. And I got this overwhelming sense of nausea, and I just freaking puked my guts out. And, the Shipibo, they take that as a compliment. Like, the medicine is getting out of you what it needs to get out of you in these forms of purge. And I got that all out of me. Continued with sort of the visual hallucinations that night. And as they closed the ceremony, we all went back to our rooms. And when I got back to my room, I still felt really nauseous. And I went into the bathroom and I just puked in this dark, veiny, just muscular, nasty entity came out of my stomach. And I don't know what that was, but it turned into a liquid, and I flushed it down the toilet, and I felt this lightness come over me. I had purged some form of evil that was trapped in me out through that ceremony, which I think primed me for the next day. But going into the next day, I still felt pretty nauseous. I was kind of like, I don't really want to do this again. I'm not ready for another round. But through another day of eating really good, wholesome nutrition, a lot of the produce there is picked right out of the rainforest, and it's so nutrient dense and nourishing that by the end of the day, they did another flower bath with us. I felt pretty good. So I got into the second night of ceremony, which is when I really had my very deep experience. I took the exact same amount of medicine, the shot glass of this dark, bitter liquid, and down the hatch. And very quickly that night, I went right into a pretty deep out of body experience, and where I found myself after the sort of visual hallucinations initially, with the room counterclockwise spinning around me. It was like a fluid, and then I went into it, and I went out of my body, and where I found myself was in this dark pit of hell. There were people being tortured around me. I could hear screaming and moaning and vomiting, and everything just smelled like puke and shit and just decay and rot, and everything sounded like death around me. And it was just darkness, and I was trapped in this pit. And the more I tried to think about what was going on, and the more I tried to use logic, the tighter whatever that was squeezed me in the darker pit of hell that I went into. And it just continued to take the air out of me, and it got more intense. And I became in this loop where I just felt I was going insane, and that I was going to be trapped forever. I completely lost track of time. It felt like I lived years and years and years in that dark place, just stuck in this loop of insanity and putrid stink and smells and gory imagery. And it was just hell. And I thought I had let go. I thought I had just surrendered, but it just kept squeezing me because I hadn't fully surrendered to what was going on. And I was in this dark labyrinth of all the things that had happened in my life, all these traumas, starting from a very young age of, I won't get too much into the details, but just I had a sort of disconnected childhood from my mother at a very young age. I was a kind of a runt. I was bullied a lot, got in a lot of fights, had a lot of anger growing up. Then into the military, where, that's kind of part of it. That's that resilience that I had built through, a childhood of sort of being hard on myself and building that resiliency. But over the years, in short, I just built all these walls to protect me and to make me stronger and to guard me. But what those really had become was it had trapped me in this freaking labyrinth of my own soul, and I wasn't feeling anymore. Then going through all the trauma of the ejection, the physical rehabilitation, just to be punched back in the nuts by the pharmaceutical industry and everything that happened through the VA, I had just built up these walls, and I'd become so disconnected with myself. And through all this squeezing and torture and violence that I was experiencing, I found my inner child that was trapped inside of that dark labyrinth, curled in the fetal position at the core of my soul. And once I saw him, I let go, and I surrendered to the medicine. And the walls of this labyrinth disappeared, and I shot up into the heavens, escaped that darkness. And then I proceeded to have one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. I was with God, and I saw what God is. And I saw the world that, we are so limited by our five senses in this realm of being. We only have these five senses to perceive everything around us. And there's so much more going on. And this medicine unlocked that so I could see it. Again, time was of no relevance. I underwent the lifetime experience of everything from insects, amphibians, lizards, other animals, other humans. I lived entire lifetimes as all these other entities, countless other creatures and beings. I became the soul of this old growth Amazon tree, and I experienced time through the perspective of this tree. And what was just like a breath to me as the tree was, villages were built and collapsed. There were civilizations that built and collapsed in front of me. And as a tree, it was just a breath and all that had happened. It put time into a completely different perspective. And after I lived this life cycle as a tree, and each of these life cycles was just really just a breath, breathing in and growing and expanding, and then holding it and holding that. And you can only hold the breath so long, and it would get dark and decay and die, and I would let out, and there'd be this darkness and death. But then there would be the rebirth, and there was this cycle, this yin and yang of death and rebirth, and the way it was connected. And I wish I could articulate everything that I experienced that night more clearly, but it was like I had been released from the confines of logic in the human brain and was able to experience everything else that's going around us that we can't even understand or contemplate. And I caught just a glimpse of that I was able to bring back. But I spent this lifetime as a tree, and then I experienced a lifetime as the soul of the earth and what time was to the earth. I experienced then a lifetime as the soul of our solar system and our sun. And then I experienced it as the universe and realized that everything is connected. We are all from the same matter. We are all from the same exact thing. We are all so interconnected. And I saw what God is and how beautiful that is. And again, I wish I could articulate more of that journey and what I experienced that night, but it was so profound that I can only just grasp tiny little bits that I was able to bring back with me and speak about. But as the evening went on, I was so freed. Once I saw all these perspectives, I was just able to travel anywhere in the universe, anywhere in time, go anywhere, do anything. And I spent eons of life in that realm, experiencing all of that. And then towards the end of the night, at least for the end of the night where my body was at, I came back and I was up in this Malacca that was hovering above the Malacca we were in. And inside of it were what I perceived to be the souls of each of us that were actually physically the 8 other veterans that were in this Malacca with me. Our souls were up in this sort of heavenly Malacca that we had all elevated to as our souls. And in that room, we all spoke to each other about what we had experienced, our souls had experienced throughout our entire lifespan of our souls. And we weren't communicating in words, we were communicating in almost this song, but it wasn't the voices of humans. It was almost like a frog human, just very hard to explain, but somehow I understood it. And through that language of almost this song, we were able to communicate what we had experienced. And it was just a beautiful closing to the night as I came back into my body. And when I came to in my body, the night had gone by, and the whole room, I mean, they say, you get a double platinum if you puke and shit in the same night. Well, that room was like a quadruple platinum. I mean, there was shit and piss and vomit and everything was thrown about. There had been some crazy things that had happened in that room that night as our spirits had left and traveled the universe. But once I could finally stand, I was the last person in the room, and the gentleman who ran the retreat center finally came up to me and helped me find my headlamp and put my things together. I mean, there was puke all around me. Somehow I managed not to get anything on me. I don't know.
Did you have buckets?
Yeah, we had buckets.
Yeah. So the neighbors looking out, I'm like, you have a bucket. It's not like it's all over the floor.
But I think whatever had happened in there, I mean, buckets had been tipped over.
Sure.
Stuff had come out of people that just weren't able to make it where they're supposed to.
Sure.
That night I didn't purge in that way. I didn't purge through bodily fluids anyways. There's many methods of purge, from laughter, crying, shaking, shivering, puking, shitting, pissing, all these different ways that you can purge. But I came to, and I could barely stand. And with the help of the guide, I got up and made my way from the Malacca downstairs to this outside area, and the freaking universe was just out that night. It was kind of a stormy, overcast night, but this hole had formed in the clouds, and there was a little open area in the middle of the retreat center that had a circular pad in the very center of it. And I walked out towards that path. And as I walked out, this massive insect flew and landed in my hair. I don't know what it was, but it like got tangled in my hair for a second. And I kind of brushed it off and it flew off. I mean, an insect that felt like it was the size of like a freaking bird. But I walked out into that pad and I stood there and I just looked up and it felt like I was just in the universe. The stars were so vivid out in the middle of the jungle. You know, there's no light pollution and you could see all the features of the galaxy around. And it felt like I was just this little entity standing in the middle of the outer space, which we are. I mean, we're on a freaking spaceship on the planet Earth, this little life system traveling through space, chasing this massive sun, spiraling through the galaxy. And I was able to see that night, that I am just this little person experiencing this human life. And the gentleman who ran the retreat center summed it up really nicely the next day, which is, you know, we are these spiritual beings having a human experience. The next night, after some more recovery, I mean, I just felt this lightness. I had really, beyond like just having a faith in God, I experienced what that is. I experienced that interconnectedness, whatever you want to call it. I saw it firsthand because we are it. We are that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. I actually was gonna, I literally was preparing a question to ask you about that. So it's cool that you went into that, which was the point in the ceremony where you kind of broke out of your resistance and like all the darkness you were holding on to, and you let go. And you felt like you were elevated into this realm of light, of love. What did that feel like for you? And was that moment of awareness of love, was that the moment you felt like connected with God? Did that give you faith? Did you have faith before going into the ceremony? And like, kind of, what's your religious background, if you want to talk about
that? So that's a great question. So as a child, my family took my sister and I to a Unitarian Universalist fellowship. That was largely our foundation, which is basically we got to learn about a little bit about all different religions and spiritualities. And as I got into my teenage years, you know, through some of the traumas I had been through as a little kid started to exacerbate. And I started dealing with, you know, I was diagnosed with a seasonal affective disorder. And actually a wild part of my story from childhood is when I was in high school, I was dealing with all this, you know, depression, and I was pretty broken, and I'd become an atheist. I really felt alone in the universe. And a friend of mine, Ryan, he hooked me up with a little bag of mushrooms and went out into the woods with some buddies around a campfire and ate the majority of this little baggie of mushrooms, you know. And that evening went out into the woods and was climbing up these little pine saplings, climbing up to the top of them, holding on, and then jumping. And they would kind of like bungee you down to the surface, and just had this beautiful experience there. And as it intensified, I came back to the fire and sat around the fire. And then I was just enchanted by this fire and just watching the coals and embers burn. And it was just so vivid and beautiful. And then the night continued to intensify. And I went in to use the restroom and I looked in the mirror and I saw all this, it looked like just darkness coming out of all the pores of my face. And I was so vivid that I was clawing at my face, like, oh my God, there's like these massive monster zits like growing out of my face. And it was horrifying. So I went and sat down on the couch, just like freaking out, like reminding myself, okay, it's not really there. And then I just had this just beautiful moment. It wasn't very clear, but I saw this interconnected web. And I felt that there was this interconnection. I didn't understand it. It wasn't nearly as in depth or vivid, but it gave me just a little glimpse of this spiritual world that at that point I had basically said, it's not, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any of that. It's all nonsense. But it reconnected me to that just a little bit. And I came out of it the next morning and my depression was gone. I could feel the wind on my face again. I could smell the fresh air. I could hear the rustle of the leaves and just the beauty that was all around me. It was like I was reconnected again from a place that I was cutting myself off. And those effects from that night had lasting effects for decades. I mean, it got me to the point where I became I was functioning at a high enough level to become a fighter pilot.
Did that instill a sense of faith in you, or more just like a sense of wonder?
I mean, it definitely a sense of wonder. I think after that moment, I classified myself as agnostic. I was like a dog looking at the moon.
Okay.
I knew there was something more out there, but I
Yeah.
didn't know what it was.
So then this ceremony, right, with the ayahuasca, what did that do for you? Did it take you from where you were as an agnostic to
definitely
the full realization of?
Yeah. It showed me what God is. And I experienced it because we are that.
What is God?
God is everything. God is love. God is the connection of all of us. God is the water that we swim in, that we are part of. We are a drop of water in that ocean of God. But really, God is love. And that's what connects all of us together. We are all made of the same things. Yeah, we are maybe in these separate bodies in this realm, in this existence right now, but really we're made of the same stuff. We are connected in ways that we can't even see. And it showed me all of that. And I wish I could, I think from my perspective, I feel so many religions and beliefs have been all really trying to explain the same thing. And that is all these things that are going on around us that connect us that we can't really see or make logical sense of with our human brains or perceive with our senses. I think that's really what most of these religions seem to be trying to do in their own way.
That's why they use the term grand mysterio, or great mystery, because we can feel God, right? We can feel that union or yoga with God. We can feel that God is love, know that God is love.
No doubt.
But it's still a mystery.
Yeah. Which makes it exciting.
Yeah.
I don't want to know everything.
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't. Like, that's the humbleness towards God. Like, God is everything. So we got to be humble and honor God with the way we live. And I think that's what the medicine kind of shows too, is that it brings that awareness of like, wow, like God does love me. Oh, wow, like this is holy communion. It's a holy communion. And that's the most inspiring thing in the world. Now, certain people, let's say they're Christian, would go ask, and I've been asked this question many times, so I figured I'd throw it at you. Well, didn't everything you experienced, wasn't that all hallucination? It's all the devil speaking in tongues, confusing you?
No, it's so much deeper than that. And I don't think anybody can understand it until they go through it. There is a massive difference between a hallucination and what you experience on these indigenous medicines in that environment. No doubt. There is a very big difference.
So the hallucinations that you had from like pharmaceutical drugs was a very different thing than your dreamlike state, because the thing to know about ayahuasca is it's made with DMT. When you dream in your pineal gland, you release DMT. So it creates the dream state. So you're in a dream state of consciousness with this medicine. Yeah. And the question is, like, I mean, how real is the dream? Some people describe reality as a dream in terms of philosophy, but back to you on that. The difference of like the hallucination versus the medicine and the dream.
There's a big difference between thinking that the government's hunting you, between hallucinating that the road signs are scrambling and decoding to give you a message from the state I was at. But I think also, once I had been put on these heroic doses of these pharmaceutical medications, these psychotropic meds, I think my body did die on the floor of that ER. And that's where I had an out of body experience, which I've heard people say you have. Psychosis is essentially the soul leaving the body. And I think I had that in the moments that I have died, literally died in my life and come back to life. And so somehow these indigenous medicines, it's almost like they induce that state of death. And in that, it releases your soul to experience in a lucid manner, to experience the universe. And you know, I'm just breaking the surface on this stuff. I don't begin to understand it all. But there was certainly a massive difference between a lot of the psychosis issues I was dealing with as a result of the pharmaceutical medications, and then what happens when you're in the indigenous medicine with the indigenous people in an indigenous setting in the freaking rainforest, you know, in this case, with nature. There is a very big difference of what that does to your body,
100%,
and soul.
100%.
And I think, you know, it's very difficult to explain. I think the only way people can really understand it is to experience it themselves. But there is no doubt in my mind that, and what really, the reason I think it is so real is because so many people, while everybody's experience and journey is different on these medicines, and you know, with the different experiences I've had now, every single time it's very different, but everybody kind of comes back to this common theme of this sense of love, connectedness, and having experienced what God is. I don't think anybody doesn't get that out of it, which is interesting that we all have, despite, you know, whatever we saw and whatever snake or leopard or whatever spirits that we encountered, you know, we all come back with this sort of same message.
So if you're thinking this is crazy, this is the work of the devil. Well, if the devil is inducing a lot of love, I mean, you got to ask yourself, is that the devil or is that God? So the other thing to know is that your experience, my experience, these aren't unique experiences. This is just science. Johns Hopkins University did a study on thousands of people who had psychedelic experiences. Guess what? They also found God. They also learned that God is love. So that's science. And not only is it such good science, but the laws are changing across the country so people can have access to these experiences. But the difference is that, and what you went through in the way curanderos work, which are healers, indigenous medicine, is they work with prayer called Icaros. So they're using prayer as a modality for healing. So a lot of people don't believe in prayer, don't believe prayer works, or indigenous medicine doesn't work. But then why are thousands of people going to these tribes, to these healers, and reporting the same experiences? So now
it works.
There's no doubt.
It's incredible. I mean, I don't know that I would have even believed it until I experienced it. Even at the Warrior Angel Foundation event and having that ceremony there.
So that was your kind of one of your first experiences with the peyote.
Yeah, that was the first time. But that gave me a glimpse the way the psilocybin had.
Yeah.
But I didn't even even when people talked about, you know, the more intense indigenous medicines and God and everything, I still had a reluctance towards it. I was kind of like, I don't know, maybe it's just changing our chemical processes in our brain, and maybe blah blah blah. You know, I still was of that mindset. Like, I wasn't saying that was impossible. It was certainly within the realm of possibilities, but it wasn't until what ayahuasca showed me that I then knew that that was,
You knew the gospel.
that was the truth.
Yeah,
And
it is.
that, and I don't think you can't take my word for it. Don't take our word for it. Go and experience this on your own, because that's, I think, the only way that you can really see it, experience it, understand it, and heal in so many ways. It's beautiful, but don't take my word for it.
Proud of you for doing that work, brother.
Thanks, brother. Thank you for being part of this sort of rebel alliance that is formed to give people access to these indigenous medicines.
Yeah, for sure.
It's no doubt in desperate need in our current times with everything that the world is experiencing. We are in desperate need of that healing, and you see it throughout the world. We are off course, and we are broken right now, and we are separated. And it, these medicines have been around for thousands, if not more years, just countless years, prehistory. And they've been such an integral part of these little indigenous tribes that, unfortunately are so few and far between. But from the Shipibo people of the Amazon to the Bwiti in Africa with the use of Iboga, there are these people that are connected to that medicine, that have had this medicine passed down from generation to generation for thousands of years. And it is such an important part of their culture. The Bwiti, the Iboga it's a national treasure to them. And it's so healing and powerful and so important. And there's never been a more important time in our history, I feel, at least of the recorded history that we know, that we've needed this to become more accessible. And unfortunately, there's a lot of forces that have, made that not the case. And instead, the medicines that we are told from the clergy folk that are mainstream conventional medicine, the people with big degrees and fancy offices and all of that, are part of a corrupt system. They're part of the pharmaceutical industry, and a lot of them don't even know it. But yeah, I'm excited that these medicines are out there and available. At least I hope they become more accessible, but they are out there at least. And if you can find a way to experience them, they will change your life forever. And yeah, it's beautiful.
That's where I'm going to plug my book, A Psychedelic Origin of Religion, about the origin of all religions is psychedelic. Get it on Amazon today. But yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, brother.
So here's a question. You did this ceremony, you had this incredible experience with the medicine, and God bless Heroic Hearts for making that a reality.
Sure.
But how did that impact home? Because you described how home was falling apart. How did it impact home? And then
so I think when I left for that retreat, I left home, and I had been this very dark, draining force on my family. My wife had been through hell trying to save me from that. I mean, for an example of what she had to go through, one, she had a newborn baby while I was still in the military, and I'm dealing with these severe psychoses, and she's trying to take care of our little boy and me, who's suicidal, broken, disturbed, just a mess. She fights for years to get me through that, only to get me home and then have me go into this dark place where I'm brought into a mental hospital. While that was going on, while I was down in Battle Creek, my wife applied for the VA caregiver program, which is supposed to provide financial assistance to military spouses who have to deal with situations like that. Of course, was denied multiple times. So she's down in Battle Creek, Michigan, and the area we're at was not very nice. She found a cheap a cheap motel because she didn't know how long we were going to be there. She gets this crappy room. My little boy is still learning how to walk. And he's crawling around on this grimy floor of this decrepit, nasty hotel, not even hotel, motel, he stands up and he's got black crap and grime all over his hands and his knees. So my wife has to drive to the nearby, whatever it was, dollar store and bought some cleaning supplies, come back and had to re-clean this room just to make it so my little boy could be there. And she did that just so I could see them as regularly as possible as they'd come visit me. And then once they finally got me out of there, I come home and I'm this miserable human. So she had just been through years of just hell dealing with me and somehow holding on. I mean, we were so close, but I came back from that ayahuasca retreat and all of the negative crap was gone out of me, but I got back home and I went back into this world that I had created of negative energy and it kind of sucked some of it back out of me. My wife was now the one that needed to be pulled out of it, to be saved. She had gone into hell to get me. This angel had come down and saved me and gone through this path to get me back, but it had scarred her and it had hurt her soul at this point. And so when I got back and I was talking about all this stuff that it was so beautiful, and in the back of her mind, she's still kind of like, well, he's just being manic. He's going to go into another psychosis. I had created so much pain in her that she couldn't even see that this was a genuine light. But soon after I went through a traumatic brain injury clinic through the gracious folks at Defenders of Freedom down at Cranston, funded me down to Resiliency Brain Health here in Dallas, actually, where we're sitting. And I underwent 2 weeks of TBI treatment. And then over the course of the year leading up to this point, I've had some more psychedelic experiences with psilocybin, sassafras, and then probably most powerfully was iboga.
How is your relationship now?
So through this process, there's a lot of healing that's still going on between my wife and I, but she's seen the improvements. And I think she's finally, over the past year, seen that it's more than just manic behavior. She's seen that this is genuine and I am more loving. I am so connected to our children. We have 2 children now. I've got a little baby girl, my little boy, and she sees the way I interact with them. She sees the love in my heart, and she sees that I am changing. But I can see that through everything she's been through now, she needs healing.
For sure.
And I'm so desperately want her to experience what I have now experienced. And I think once she's done breastfeeding, I think she'll maybe be more open to it. But there's no doubt that now it's my turn to help pull her out of the darkness that I put her in through everything. But I mean, we're still together. We still have a family. We still co-parent. We still live together. But at this point, it's about rebuilding our romance. And I think the next step for her is going to be to experience what I've experienced and the beauty of this indigenous medicine, no doubt.
Well, I pray for healing for your family.
Thanks, brother.
And I want to do something with you. I want you to look in the camera and tell your wife how much you love her and how much she means to you and how grateful you are for putting up with all this shit you had to go through to be here.
I love you so much, and I know we have been through hell, and you have been through trauma after trauma dealing with me, and so much of the focus has been on me. But know that I am here now to try to help you heal on your healing journey, and I'll do the same for you that you did for me. And I love you so much, and I love our family. We have 2 of the most wonderful little human beings on the face of the earth that need us both to heal and to be full of love to pass that to them. So I hope you hear this, and I hope the world hears this, and the healing continues.
Aho, Baruch Hashem.
Oh,
Praying for my brother and his wife and their little babies, that this prayer, God, creator, great mystery. Thank you for this holy sacred space so you can hear this prayer and bring good healing to their family, because we all want to be whole, happy, and healthy. And family is the most important thing. So again, giving thanks for this medicine, this way of life, and hoping that we can share the good word, the good news about this medicine, and that we can all come together in a good way, because what matters the most is our families and our children. They're the future, and that we think about how we're building a world for them, not a world for our pocketbook, not a world for corporate profit, but a world for our children and our family here, our American family, that we can have the right to heal with God's medicine. It's not legal for me to practice my religion here. This is my religion. It's my way of life. And that brings me a lot of pain myself, that we continue to have to seek refuge and asylum for healing in other countries, and God bless those countries and all of the healers, the work they're doing. But that's why we're here today as brothers, because that's a message that I've tried to share in a good way with policymakers and friends and people who are interested in creating change and giving people the right to this. But it's not fair. It's not fair. And the truth hurts. And the truth is that there isn't freedom of religion in this country right now. And I would love to see the day that changes. That would be the greatest day of my life, that I could do this work here in America freely and make sure that brothers and sisters like Kegan or whoever don't have to go through, what they've been going through. So that's my prayer. That's what I pray for. Anyways, I love you all, and thanks, bro.
love you, brother.
Yeah, cool. Let's go get some tacos.
Yeah.
Peace.